Our doors are the original hollow core doors with these really cheap doorknobs from the 1950s that are loose and all scratched up. I was able to find these replacement doorknobs at the Restore for $6 a piece. First, I had to get the old knobs off, which was a little bit tricky. It turns out I had to turn the knob for it to line up with the hole for me to be able to press the release. After rotating the knob in place, I used a very small screwdriver to try to get to the release mechanism, but just putting a little pressure on it with my hand wasn't enough to release it. Luckily, a couple taps of the hammer did the trick. The next part of the doorknob rotates to remove, but no matter how much I tried to turn it, it didn't want to go. So I needed another tool for this. Once I was able to get a more secure grip, I was able to turn it pretty easily. At this point, I was finally able to access the screws that were holding it on. The front and the back of the doorknob were then able to be pulled off. The latch plate was already unscrewed, but if yours isn't, there's 2 screws usually you have to remove from that before you can pop it out. While I would have loved to have replaced the doors completely, we're on a budget, so we decided to paint them. The first thing I needed to do was repair any problems on the surface of the door. Some spots needed a little bit of wood putty or sanding, and then I was able to put a layer of primer on. These doors with their brown color have a lot of bleed through, and so you can still see, you can see the difference here between like the white of the primer and the white of the paint, that there was a lot of bleed through the primer, making it look kind of yellow. After this door, I decided to put on 2 coats of primer instead of just 1. And this door, since I didn't put on 2 coats of primer, I had to put on 3 coats of the finished paint in order to make it not bleed through. So either use a really good primer or put on 2 coats like I did. Installing the new doorknob was a lot easier than taking out the old ones. I started by pushing in the latch plate. Next, you need to line up the doorknob to insert it into the locking mechanism. There is a rounded part and a flat part, and you just kind of have to orient it the right way for it to fit through. Between my vision not being so great and the latch plate wiggling around, it was a little bit tricky for me to get everything lined up, so it took me a few tries. I realized it would be a lot easier if I screwed in the latch plate so that it wouldn't be moving around while I insert the doorknob, so I went ahead and did that now. You have to orient the other side of the doorknob correctly too, because once again, there's like a rounded side and a flat side. So you have to insert it on there correctly, and then also make sure that the 2 screw holes line up with the receptacles on the other side, which was a little bit tricky to figure out. I had to kind of look in there, pull the doorknob out just a little bit to look inside to make sure that the screws were lining up, because when I tried to do it blind, I couldn't get it. So by pulling the doorknob out a little bit like I did right there and looking in from the side, I could see where the screw hole was, and I could make sure that the screw lined up with it, and I just tightened it a little bit by hand to hold it in place. I did that same thing with the second screw, I had to still look inside and make sure that I was lining up the screw with the screw hole and turning it a little bit just to get it started. Finally, I was able to screw the knob in completely. Time to test it out. Here's another look at what the doors looked like before and how they look now. I think it's an improvement.